as far as his financial situation prior to the incident?
I don't know much about his finances. His wife lived in Alamogordo and had a home there, and I've been there, and it was a nice house. Well, it was just a nice house in a nice part of town. It wasn't extraordinary in any which way, but it was a nice home, and she had a pretty yard with flowers. And I don't know whether she didn't want to live on the ranch or what, but the Foster Ranch was a big ranch, and probably the pay was something important to Mac.
Any idea what a man would be paid to run a ranch in those days?
No. I know what we had to pay hired men when we hired them just by the day, but I don't have any idea what a ranch manager would have gotten.
What did a hand get per day back then?
A common hand would get about $60 a month, and or $5 a day for a day's work. If it was hard work, and if it was somebody that knew what he was doing, like windmill work or fence work. But I don't know what Mac done. It wasn't anything you talked about around the table.
Was there anything different about him after this?
He might have been a little more reticent because he felt like he was disgraced, and he really wanted to square himself with his neighbors. I think that's why he talked a little, because he was afraid that the neighbors might think he had done something of a crooked nature. But he might have been a little more anxious to, I don't know. When we built this house, I said, this house that's in the painting, Lyman didn't know anything about plumbing. He cut two pieces of pipe, and they were both too short. And Mac come up and helped him, and they put in the plumbing together. Now, I don't know if Mac would have done that before that or not. This was in the early 50s.
Who painted the picture?
One of my sons did.
Did he paint all these pictures?
He painted everything in oil and did all the wood carvings. Anything that's in China, I did it.
I'm impressed.
He did this one by the fire, by the
Yes.
The campfire?
That's a story. That's a story that's really true. That happened when my husband was about 2 or 3 years old. You want to turn it off?
No, that's okay.
My son painted it from his father's story about it. At that time, they had no fences, or very few, and lots of cowboys. And they ran, this was like the Chisholm outfit, but they didn't work for Chisholm, they worked for Hinkle. And they run cattle from the Pecos plumb to the mountains. And anyway, these cowboys went out in the morning. I don't know how many there were, half a dozen. And this one didn't come back. So they knew something had happened to him. And what had happened was that his horse stepped in a hole and fell with him and broke the man's leg, but not the horse's leg. And the wolves could smell the blood. The skin was broken. Could boot was full of blood. And the wolves could smell the blood, and if National Geographic, and they did, I read it, if they want to tell you that wolves won't attack, maybe they won't if there's just one. But where there's a whole ring of wolves, a bunch, and they smell blood, they would. And anyway, he had little chips of wood that he got on fire and threw at them all night long. And they found him, the other cowboys found him the next morning. And my mother-in-law, Lyman's mother, walked up to it and says, "There's supposed to have been a tree right there. That's where the chips come from." My son had never painted a tree. He never painted a tree until I insisted that he paint these that are around the house. And so he didn't put any tree in it. And her sister, Aunt Jenny, walked up to it and said, somebody else in the room says, "Well, did he get over it?" She says, "Well, it sure was a good old answer." So I guess he got over it.
Those are beautiful pictures.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I treasure everything
Oh, you
here.
should.
My son was selling at the time that he died, and he had sold several portraits. And the people who had commissioned portraits came and gone. But I kept everything else. I could have sold some. I just plastered the walls with them.
Yeah.
Great.
You don't want to see
And what is it that you painted?
I paint china.
And what in here did you do?
Well, this cabinet is full of it.
Up here?
That cabinet is full of it. And everything except one or two antiques in these shelves.
That's obvious where he learned it from.
Yeah. How about these cups with birds?
I painted all of them.
It's incredible.
Actually, that's marvelous.
Now, I didn't paint the Virgin that's in the window. I did about half of the birds, or more than half, maybe.
The flowers on the china thing?
Oh, yes, I did all those.
It's really realistic. Excellent.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed doing it. My son was painting at the time that I found a lady who gave lessons, and that was her husband that came with the onions. And I thought, well, I've always enjoyed China, and I'll do this so I don't interfere with his work. Like heck. He had talent that I'd never have.
It's obvious.
I wouldn't say that.
You've got a lot of talent.
But it's obvious that he had lots of talent too.
He had a lot of talent.
But it was pretty much a sideline for him?
That's true. It's just-
He was 40 years old when he died, and he had really just gotten into the artistic efforts. He drew from the time he was 4 or 5 years old, things that you could, well, I'm his mother, things that you might say, this is awfully good. He drew one that I hung on the wall until it turned yellow, and it was a cowboy standing by a windmill. And the windmill was much taller than, the cowboy was much taller than the windmill. So you know who was the most important.
Mm-hmm.
But both were very good. And he was 4 when he drew that. But I have paintings of his all over. I have a grandson and 2 grandsons that are this daughter's sons. One of them is an art teacher.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to video the paintings.
All right.
I'd like to. I don't know if it'll come out, how good it'll be, but I'd certainly like to give it a shot. And you say this is his house, or your house?
Yes, that's the ranch house that we built.
Is it still there?
Yes, as far as I know. My husband had, after we moved in here and I knew what was going on, he had 5 little strokes. But he had glaucoma, and my son and I were suspicious that he had some. This is a painting of his too. This is not a photograph.
Is it done from a photograph?
But this one, my son did it.
Worked in a lot of mediums.
Oh yes. Pass. Oh, I can't think of the name of it.
Set.
He had glaucoma and was treated for it for several years, and his eyesight was such that this old excitable woman wouldn't ride with him, except on a ranch where it didn't matter. But we were coming back from Roswell with a load of feed, and I was driving. We had a 3/4 ton pickup, and usually loaded it with 2 or 3 tons.
This is when approximately?
This was maybe in the 50s. I couldn't tell you exactly. It didn't have anything to do with mine.
Right.
Have you been, I guess you've been to Corona,
Yes.
and have you crossed the Gallo and then gone up by what was the Reynolds Ranch then? There's a long straight road right along the top of I'd call it a mesa. It stretches for at least 2 or 3 miles, just as straight as a ribbon. You come up from a deep draw and go up on this long straight road. Well, go
That's
back.
from Corona.
This is going to
Going to
Corona.
Corona.
And the cutoff that is 59 miles out here, and then it cuts off to go to Corona. It wasn't paved then. And anyway, go back to 1942. About 1942, there were lots of Army planes going over, because that's right on a direct line between here and Albuquerque. And there was one that had the bomb site. If you remember, they had a bomb site that they protected with men's lives. And the planes were fixed so that they'd blow up if they didn't land just properly. Well, anyway, this plane circled this was night. We had gone to bed. It was about 10, 11 o'clock. And nearly everybody had tin roofs. This was 1942 now. You could see the tin roofs shining in whatever light there was. And this plane, you could tell it was in trouble because of the way the motors sounded. And they circled every ranch house in that area, ours included. And by the time you think of what to do to go down to the field with your pickup and shine the lights on the furrows the way they ran or something, they were gone and gone on to some other place. Anyway, they spotted this long road across there, and they tried to land and it blew up. And they cordoned that off for a week, gathering up pieces. And anyway, this was 1950, and I was driving real slow, and up out of the Gallo, which is very sandy. You don't cross the Gallo just anywhere. It's so sandy that you could bog down in